The $800 million lie. How a broken claw almost started World War III. A billionaire builds a ship the size of a skyscraper, sails to nowhere, and quietly tries to steal a Soviet nuclear submarine off the Pacific floor at 16,500 feet. Price tag, $800 million. Sounds clean, right? Plot twist, halfway up the claw snaps, warheads tumble, and the cover story doesn't just protect the mission, it rewires how governments hide truth. Most people think this was a slick CIA heist. It was. It was a gamble where one mechanical failure could have sparked a superpower collision. Here, what actually happened, why the lie had to be bigger than the mission, and how a broken claw became policy. The Vanishing and the Hunt. March 1968. A Soviet Gulf II ballistic missile submarine, hull number K-129, sails from Kamchatka and never checks in. No distress call, no beacon. The Pacific is loud, and yet the ocean goes quiet around that hull. The Soviet Navy launches a massive search. Aircraft, trawlers, and warships comb grid after grid across the North Pacific. They sweep the wrong water for weeks. Now, this is important because the United States is listening differently. SOS-US, the underwater hydrophone network built to hear Soviet submarines, registers something ugly northeast of Hawaii. A low, violent acoustic event. Not a collision, not a volcano, a metallic implosion. It's a clue, not a fix. Everything changes when US analysts start triangulating. You don't get a bright red X on a map. You get ellipses and probability. Submarines shadow empty water. Corona satellites and later KH-8 Gambit passes scan the surface for the oddly ordinary. Slicks, debris fields, anything that says metal died here. Most people think satellites do magic. They don't. They give you slivers, but those slivers narrow the search box. Here, what actually happens next. A quiet Navy tasking turns into a hunt with no public name. US boats creep into the suspected area and wait for a sign. They know what the Soviets don't. K-129 is likely sitting in the abyss, almost 3 miles down, with 3 SSN-4 ballistic missiles and nuclear-tipped torpedoes aboard. The stakes aren't just hardware. They're codebooks, crypto gear, and the navigation brain that tells you how the Soviets aim. Now, you might be thinking, why not notify Moscow, claim humanitarian concern, and avoid the risk? Because a sunken warship remains sovereign territory, and handing back a treasure chest of nuclear secrets isn't how the Cold War works. Most people think the spy game is about stealing documents. This was about stealing an entire vault. On shore, the human angle is brutal and quiet. Soviet families get a story without a body. In the US, a handful of cleared officers carry a secret that could tilt the intelligence balance for a decade. And in every operations room, there's a clock ticking. Saltwater is a patient thief. Corrosion eats wiring. Currents shift wreckage. If you're going to try, you can't wait forever. But here's where it gets interesting. The depth changes everything. 16,500 feet isn't a scuba problem, it's a physics problem. Pressure near 8 tons per square inch. Temperatures close to freezing. No diver, no conventional submersible can just clamp and go. A traditional salvage, impossible. The wreck lies on soft sediment, broken, with unknown fracture lines. Any tug could tear the hull like wet cardboard. So the US asks a different question. If you can't send a diver to the wreck, can you bring a machine to the wreck? And can you hide the entire operation in plain sight? That second part matters because the Soviets will notice a giant, stationary ship loitering near their loss months after their own hunt failed. If they suspect a lift, you don't get a standoff. You get a confrontation with guns and flags in international waters under press eyes. The first step is certainty. Analysts pore over every acoustic spike. Engineers model how a hull breaks when it freefalls 2 miles. The probable coordinates get tight enough to justify something historic. A recovery plan that has to work the first time because there won't be a second if it's blown. And remember these numbers. They'll matter later. About 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii, nearly 16,500 feet down, and a budget climbing toward $800 million. That's the stage. There's a micro-story that says a lot. A junior analyst asks an old hand, what if we find it and can't lift it? The answer comes back flat. Then we learn how. That's the power and peril of this era. When money, secrecy, and fear line up, the boundary between possible and attempted collapses. But there's a second clock. The Soviets may return. They may already suspect an accident zone they missed. If they arrive to see an American Colossus parked above their dead, flags go up, signals jam, and someone in Moscow demands a hard response. You don't need a shot fired. You need a boarding team climbing a ladder in the middle of the Pacific and a captain on the bridge making a call no one can unmake. Therefore, the hunt becomes a plan within a plan. Find the wreck. Build a lie so persuasive it can carry a ship bigger than a football field across the world, and design a machine that can reach down 3 miles, grab a fractured submarine, and lift it through living water without tearing it apart. Most operations choose one miracle. This one needed 3. By late 1969, the intelligence community aligns around a simple statement with insane implications. The target is accessible. Not easy, not safe. Accessible. The phrase unlocks budgets. It pulls in contractors who won't know what they're building. It authorizes a cover story so boring it's brilliant, deep-sea mining for manganese nodules. And it commits a small group to a truth they can never admit. If they succeed, they'll say nothing. If they fail, they'll say less. The wreck is found. The decision is made. The ocean isn't the only thing that's deep. Secrets are too. And the next move means building a lie big enough to hide the truth while you try to pull a nuclear submarine out of black water. Building a lie big enough to hide the truth. Okay, so here's the thing. You can't park a ship the length of a city block over a Soviet grave and call it science, unless the story is airtight. Most people think you slap a logo on steel and stamp it classified. Not here. They needed an industry. So they built one, on paper first, then in steel. Deep-sea manganese nodules. Potato-sized rocks scattered across abyssal plains, rich in nickel, cobalt, copper, and dreams. The 197s were hungry for new resources. So the story didn't just sound plausible, it sounded profitable. Howard Hughes was the perfect misdirection. Reclusive, unaccountable, and rich enough to make absurd projects look like Tuesday. If Hughes wanted a ship that could mine nodules, nobody asked why the derrick needed a 600-ton gimbal or why the hull had a roof that opened like a hangar. The eccentric billionaire narrative did the heavy lifting. Howard's chasing minerals, covers for Langley's stealing a submarine, because the first line requires almost no follow-up. Reporters love spectacle. They hate math on ocean engineering. But here's where it gets interesting. The CIA didn't just draft a press release. They engineered plausible deniability into contracts. Shell companies bloomed. Summer Corporation at the top, Global Marine as the muscle, and a lattice of limited partnerships with names designed to evaporate on contact. In procurement files, a phrase becomes doctrine. We can neither confirm nor deny. Not a slogan yet, an operating principle. Vendors got slivers. Welders thought they were building a riser. Accountants saw oceanographic research. Only a narrow ring knew the capture vehicle wasn't scooping nodules. It was a steel hand built to cradle a coffin. Money trails told their own story. Capital flowed through cutouts so the line from a black budget to a Pennsylvania yard didn't glow for a curious staffer. Invoices described subsea handling assemblies, not claws. Insurance riders talked about cargo of unusual geometry, not a Soviet hull with nuclear torpedoes. Every document carried 2 loads, the physical one and the narrative one. If a subpoena ever landed, the paper would read boring. Boring is armor. Now you might be thinking, why not use a Navy ship and classification stamps? Because a warship invites a warship. A commercial platform invites boredom. The genius wasn't just the front, it was operational camouflage. A ship that looks like it's mining can loiter, lower pipe, and make noise that matches the fiction. Tugboats, supply barges, helicopter runs, all banal in the language of industry. In the language of the Cold War, that's invisibility. The line needed hardware, so the hardware served the line. The Moon Pool, a gaping hole midship, was sold as a sheltered transfer bay for nodules. In reality, it was a private ocean where a submarine section could be hidden from satellites and Soviet trawlers. The massive derrick, a drill tower, the heave compensation system, a station-keeping necessity. Paper renamed every secret into an engineering requirement for a fake business. Even the giant weather doors were explained as safety shields, not curtains for espionage. And the sales job didn't stop at the pier. Trade journals got seeded with stories about seabed riches. Conferences in 1971 and 1972 featured speakers hyping nodules as the next oil. A smaller vessel, doing survey, made real passes in the North Pacific, conveniently near the coordinates you remember, collecting sediment samples and leaving a breadcrumb trail of credibility. The cover didn't just protect Azorian, it birthed sincere interest in deep-sea mining across the 197s. That's how good the fiction was. It created believers, some of whom built careers on it. But the lie had to survive contact with the Soviets. Intelligence knew a fisheries research trawler could show up and start counting oddities. So the plan built noise into the schedule. Equipment breakdowns, weather delays, maintenance holds that explained why a ship sat still for days with cranes twitching. Operational noise became a shield. If Moscow sent a cable asking, "What are they doing?" the answer looked consistent with the brochure. Inside, the need-to-know walls were brutal. Two teams shared decks. The cover team spoke nodules and productivity. The cleared team spoke loads, capture fingers, and lift dynamics. You could stand in a corridor and hear two realities in parallel. This only works if everyone believes their slice is the whole pie. Doubt is a leak. Conviction is a seal. There's a micro-story from a contracting office that nails the logic. A lawyer balks at indemnifying a component described so vaguely it could be anything. A project manager says, "It's a basket, it moves rocks." The lawyer signs because baskets are boring. That's the power of context. Shape it, and risk looks routine. Now, this is important because the cover shaped the machine. Tolerances, weights, and timelines had to map to something a mining vessel could plausibly do. If the claw looked like science fiction, the lie collapses. If it looked like a big gripper for geology, the lie breathes. Even noise profiles were tuned, deck routines that read like drilling, not theft. Every alarm, every crane move, every forklift beep supported the story. The choreography trained binoculars to see industry, not intrigue. Everything changes when the ship must sail. A lie on paper is theory. A lie at sea faces binoculars. So the final test wasn't legal or financial. It was behavioral. Could an $800 million ghost act boring under surveillance? If yes, the path to the wreck stays open. If no, you get a radio hail that starts with "Identify your operations" and ends with "History books." The story sold. Now the machine had to work, or everything would snap. Operational camouflage extended to language. Radio calls stayed dry. Humps down, string stable, riser hold. Deck signage wore neutral verbs. Logs tracked throughput, not targets. Even catering schedules were tuned to simulate normal port rhythms for resupply flights. A suspicious mind could still draw lines, but each line ended in a plausible now. That's how you hide a move in daylight. The final layer was contingency. If a Soviet boarding team arrived, the captain could offer a tour of the wrong decks, show a lab with nodule bins, and never open the doors that mattered. Behind those doors, a purge plan lived. Wipe records, flood the well, kill the evidence. No drama, just levers with names no one would say aloud. You don't plan for panic, you plan for muscle memory. So they built an industry to carry a lie that could carry a ship, that could carry a machine that might carry a submarine. That stack only works if every story holds under pressure. If any layer breaks, contract, behavior, language, the rest get exposed. The lesson is simple and cold. In the deep, engineering buys you inches. Cover buys you time. And you need both before you touch black water. Engineering the impossible claw, Clementine. Here's where the math stops being abstract. 16,500 feet isn't a depth, it's a regime. Pressure near 7,300 psi wants to crush voids, thicken oils, and slow valves. Light is useless. Cameras turn to snow. Most people think you send a sub with big lamps. You don't. At that depth, vision lies. Touch tells the truth. So the brief sounds simple and reads insane. Build a capture vehicle that can find, grip, and lift a shattered submarine section, blind while looking like mining. They give it a soft name, Clementine. On drawings, it's a frame with 6 articulated fingers. In steel, it's a cathedral of trusses, hinge knuckles, and hydraulic muscle, scaled to straddle a broken cylinder and hug internal frames, not fragile plating. Each finger needs 2 virtues that rarely coexist: strength to hold and compliance to not shred embrittled steel. Now, this is important because the wreck isn't uniform anymore. Years at depth, cold-soaked welds and seeded microcracks. The implosion in 1968 and the seabed impact pre-stressed everything. Grip the wrong rib and you rip history. That's why the shoes are wide, slightly soft with elastomer layers, and shaped to search for bone, frame edges and ring stiffeners, by load signature, not by sight. Load cells and contact switches along each finger tell operators when they've found structure. If the graph holds during a microlift, you're on bone. If it slides, you're on paint. You don't hang Clementine on a single cable. You build a riser string, all-field style, miles long, 60-foot pipe joints stacked into a steel spine. Every thread is a potential future headline. The ocean treats that spine like a tuning fork. Engineers model resonance, then detune it with mass collars, fairings, and diameter steps so vortex shedding never locks onto a clean note. If the sea finds rhythm, it will sing your lift apart. Everything changes when you add the ship's motion. The surface rides a swell, the bottom doesn't. If the deck moves feet and the frame moves inches, brittle metal pays for your slop. Enter heave compensation, accumulators the size of rooms, cylinders, servo valves, and control logic senses deck heave and pushes equal and opposite in real time. It's not magic, it's a governor on violence. It holds vertical load inside a band tight enough that the wreck feels a steady hand instead of a yank. Positioning is geometry under pressure. They lay a long baseline array of acoustic beacons around the site. Clementine carries transponders. The ship solves ranges into position and holds station with thrusters while the derrick meters feed. A quarter-degree error up top becomes feet down there. Feet break things, inches by time. So the control room lives by numbers, lateral offsets, yaw drift, vertical rate, rendered big and simple. Let me show you the first contact. There's no window, there's a hum. The riser's strain climbs a hair and doesn't drain like mud. The operator eases right, lifts a whisper, watches the platter. That feels like steel. Outer fingers close first, wide and patient to spread load. Pause, let the hull settle into clamp. Trim millimeters. Inner fingers hunt for internal frames until each finger's load cell sings the same song. Then a tiny test lift, mere inches. If the load holds shape, you've got structure. If it slips, you breathe, back off, reposition, and try again. Micro story from shore trials. They built a mock cylinder, clamped wrong on purpose, and listened to failure. The sound was a dull pop, not a scream. The needles told the story first. That ritual, trust the gauges, not your gut, became religion. Now you might be thinking, why not just overbuild and crush certainty into place? Because the wreck will fail before your frame does. Cold embrittlement lives at weld toes and bolt holes. A brute clamp writes a headline you can't retract. So they design sacrificial links, cheap metal that fails loud and early before the main frame does. They put hinge pins in all filled pockets so friction stays predictable in the cold. They tune elastomer hardness so it spreads pressure without creeping under load. They build compliance into strength. Control is where good intentions die. Miles of pipe add delay. The heave comp can lead the vertical wave, but a perfect vertical correction can feed lateral and torsional energy if phase drifts. So the frame carries torsion sensors and lateral accelerometers. If a slow twist wakes up, operators change thruster posture to tilt the string a degree, run a microlower to bleed stored energy, or shift control phase to shove the system out of the bad band. Modal monitoring isn't a sidebar, it's the main plot. Here's the part most people miss. The machine has to act like a miner to keep the lie alive. Cable trays wear survey labels. Winches are riser support. The moon pool doors are weather shields. Deck choreography looks like pipe handling. Noise sounds like drilling. If a Soviet trawler points a long lens, they see industry, not a theft. Risk never leaves. A misstalked joint 10,000 feet down is a patient saboteur. A forgotten damper lets a whisper of oscillation fatten into a sawtooth hours later. A thermocline thickens drag and nudges phase off by degrees that matter. So they write rituals, torque logs at every joint, ultrasonic checks on suspect threads, acoustic health monitoring listening for the ping of a crack starting. Hear a ping, pause, bleed, reset. Rehearsal turns courage into calm. In a quiet patch, they lower onto planted targets, relearn how hydraulics that behave on deck turn molasses in cold, and recalibrate sensors that drift. The lesson is humbling and constant. Perfect doesn't exist. Good enough to climb is the only green light you'll ever get. Clementine leaves the yard elegant and temperamental, a machine built to do what physics barely allows. Once. Everyone on board knows the ocean will try to teach it a new note. The job is simple and brutal. Make sure that note doesn't become the one you hear when metal lets go. The Glomar Explorer sets the stage. Everything we've built so far, the lie and the machine, needs a stage that looks boring from a mile away and impossible from 5 feet. The Hughes Glomar Explorer is that paradox. From the dock, it reads like a supersized drill ship, towering derrick, cranes, helideck, and a boxy superstructure stretched across a football field of steel. But the magic sits in the middle, a moon pool the size of a basketball court, sealed by segmented, weathered doors that can swallow a secret hole. You don't lift a submarine onto an open deck. You bring the ocean inside and close the roof. Now, this is important because the center well changes exposure. Satellites can't see into a box. Soviet trawlers can't film through steel. Deck choreography looks like routine riser handling, pipe sections moving from racks to the derrick, then disappearing into the ship's throat. Inside that throat is the garage, a hidden bay where Clementine can mate, where recovered structure can rise into dry air without a single watcher getting a line of sight. Outside, it's a mining show. Inside, it's a black-budget theater. Crew dynamics make the illusion work. 2 realities share one hull. The cover team wears logos, fills out all productivity logs, and talks in the grammar of exploration. The cleared team speaks numbers that matter: load, torque, drift. Walk past a bulkhead, and the conversation flips from investors to impact coefficients. A quiet rule governs everything. If you're on the wrong side of the door, you don't ask. That's not just security, it's cognitive insulation. People perform better when their story is consistent. But here's where it gets interesting. The ship doesn't sail into empty ocean. It's shadowed. Soviet auxiliaries, fishing trawlers with too many antennas, linger at visual range. They count patterns, pipe trips, station-keeping cycles, helicopter runs. If the profile matches drilling, suspicion stays manageable. If anything looks off, questions get louder. So Glomar runs a script. Regular pipe trips, periodic maintenance, holds, and noisy but explainable clanks from the derrick. Maritime boredom as armor. Operational camouflage isn't just behavior, it's media noise. Trade journals gush about nodules. Lobbyists brief staffers on industrial frontiers. The goal isn't headlines, it's plausibility. When a trawler radios American mining ship stationary in sector, a desk officer can pull a clipping that says, "Yes, Hughes is mining nodules." The cover breathes because paper exists to back it. Inside the ship, you feel the duality. One deck over, a crewman inventories, or samples that don't exist. Down in the moon pool control room, operators babysit heave compensation and stare at displays that turn ocean motion into math. The well goes cathedral quiet when it has to. Once the doors slide shut, the ship becomes a private planet. In that sealed volume, lasers can measure, cutters can spark, and cameras can record without a photon leaking outside. Security wraps around the hull in subtle ways. Tugs keep distance. A supply barge sits athwart, blocking long lens angles. Radar paints nearby vessels early. Radio protocols use euphemisms, pumps down, string stable, phrases that mean everything to the cleared ear and nothing to anyone else. A contingency plan lives where no one wants to look. If boarding is attempted, initiate emergency destruction and flood the well. You don't pray that page stays shut. You train so it never gets pulled. Now you might be thinking, what if the Soviets probe? They don't need to fire. They can drift close, call on a loud hailer, and ask to inspect for safety. That's where the cover earns its keep. A commercial ship can claim proprietary tech, hazardous operations, and procedures that can't pause. The captain can offer a tour of the wrong deck, show a lab with bins and charts, and never open the doors that matter. A warship argues, a miner deflects. There's a micro-story that nails the edge. A trawler lingers close. On deck, the cover team accidentally spills dummy processing crates. Forklifts scramble, radios chirp. It looks like industrial clumsiness. The trawler logs a minor deck incident. Below, the cleared team barely glances up from a load plot. Everything changes when the descent begins. Pipe goes over the rotary, joint by joint, threaded and taut to ritual. Each 60-foot segment drops into the moon pool, vanishes into dark, and adds weight, risk, and commitment towards 16,500 feet. The positioning array wakes up. Thrusters tighten stance. If the sensors misread, Clementine will close on silt. If the readings hold, a vibration up the pipe soon says steel. On every deck, two sentences collide. Act like miners, think like thieves. One last detail anchors the fiction in steel. The derrick rides a 600-ton gimbal that keeps the rotary level as the ship moves, a true drilling necessity that also makes the silhouette convincing. Real engineering doing double duty as camouflage. That's the theme. Every visible choice serves a hidden purpose. When you get that right, you don't need a better lie. You need steadier hands. And here's the open loop you can't shake. Once the doors shut and the ocean disappears, the ship holds a secret no camera can catch. If anything goes wrong down there, the only witnesses are needles, numbers, and the people who have to live with them. Descent into black water. Lowering the pipe is a ritual. A 60-foot joint swings in, threads bite, torque hits spec, and the joint slides into the moon pool. Then another, then another. Hours stack into a steel spine aimed at a point 16,500 feet down. Fatigue discipline becomes law. Rotate crews before judgment fogs, verify every coupling, retorque after thermal soak, and keep the heave comp inside its band so the top never whips what the bottom can't forgive. Now this is important because time multiplies risk. Each joint adds weight, friction, and one more place where a tiny nick can grow teeth. So the cadence feels slow and isn't. Verify, lift, thread, pressure test hydraulics, confirm Clementine's transponder, and track the load curve like it's a pulse. If the line drifts off the model, you stop. If it starts to sing, you detune it with dampers before it walks the string. Navigation is geometry in a living medium. You don't point and drop. You solve drift in 3 axes while the sea lies. Long baseline beacons ping from the bottom, Clementine answers, and computers chew ranges into position. Thrusters push against stubborn current. The derrick meters feed to match compensation. The acoustic team whispers corrections. Lateral 0.6 left, your 0.2 right. A quarter degree up here is feet down there. Feet break things, inches by time. Everything changes near bottom. Flow calms, risk sharpens. Sonar returns smear in backscatter, visuals are snow. The team flies instruments, not eyes. Velocity bleeds into a hover, offsets tick down. The ship locks its stance and trades speed for certainty. In the control room, the noise floor drops. You can hear numbers move. Contact isn't a thud, it's a stiffness in the riser's song. Strain climbs a hair and doesn't drain like mud. They test it, nudge right, lift a whisper, watch the plateau. That feels like steel. A silence settles that isn't fear, it's attention. Now the choreography. Outer fingers first, wide and patient. Close until load cells register resistance. Pause. Let the hull exhale into clamp. Trim millimeters to equalize. Inner fingers next, hunting for frames through feel, not light. Each closure is followed by a tiny test lift, just inches to see if the curve holds shape. If it does, you're on bone. If it slips, you're on paint. The first lift sticks. A pencil mark goes on a pad, bone. Micro story from shore drills. They ripped a mock shell on purpose. The sound was a dull pop. The needles moved first. That's the lesson that runs the room. Trust the gauges, not your gut. Gut is late at 16,500 feet. Now you might be thinking, lock it and go. Not yet. Currents try to torque the frame. The pipe stores energy waiting for a note. They run a damped oscillation test, small commanded lifts and settles to see if a mode is lurking. A faint loop in the load trace hints at trouble. They add mass in the compensator, shift phase on the valves, and tweak thrusters to change string angle. The loop flattens, not perfect, good enough to climb. They commit. Orders are simple and terrifying. Lift at planned rate, hold alignment, keep compensation inside limits, call anything outside thresholds. The derrick finds rhythm. Each joint rises, pauses for weight transfer, then disappears into racks. The compensator breathes, dump, take, equalize, so the bottom never feels the top's worst moods. On deck, the cover routine plays. Forklifts, clipped radio calls, the theater of mining. Below, language narrows to numbers. Minutes turn to hours. The operator rides phase like a surfer rides sets. Anticipate, don't chase. A thermocline brushes the string. Drag thickens. Vertical load ticks up, then settles as the envelope swallows the step. Thrusters nudge to kill a slow yaw the current wants to feed. Beacons keep talking. The model and the ocean negotiate. Now, this is important because the system remembers. Miles of steel delay reality. The compensator's perfect vertical correction can feed lateral and torsional energy if phase drifts. They watch torsion sensors near the frame for a whisper of lateral mode. A hint appears, fades, then returns thinner. Someone writes, watch, next to a number and underlines it twice. A micropause to bleed energy becomes ritual. Up a hair, settle, wait for the loop to flatten, resume. The room relaxes in degrees that barely register. The ascent becomes thousands of small rescues. The goal isn't speed, it's coherence. If the graph stays fat and wobbling inside bands, you're winning. Everything changes at the first inspection hold. They lock position, check finger loads, scan for phase drift, and listen to the pipe. Nothing screams, everything whispers continue. The supervisor nods. The climb resumes, steady as a tide, stubborn as a promise. Before the first joint breaks air, someone murmurs what everyone knows. We're committed. Gravity runs both ways now. The ship hangs from the load as much as the load hangs from the ship. Above, the ocean is weather. Below, it's memory. The only way out is up, one joint at a time, while acting like miners and thinking like thieves. And somewhere in that column of steel, the sea is already hunting for a note you don't want to hear. The 12-hour ascent and the snap. The first hour wears a disguise called procedure. Checklists hum. The load trace wobbles inside the band they modeled on land. Heave compensation breathes, dump, take, equalize, keeping the wreck's bones from feeling the ship's worst moods. Calls stay clipped and bloodless, rate 0.15, lateral drift negligible, torsion quiet. Up top, the cover team keeps the theater loud. Forklifts clanking, hoses snapping, the clatter of pipe racks, so any binoculars translate precision into boredom. Below, needles, not nerves, decide. Now, this is important because the climb isn't one motion, it's 1,000 handoffs. Each joint rises, weight transfers, then clears the rotary while the compensator recenters the system. You don't feel a submarine. You feel attitude translated into needle twitches and a hum that grows familiar. The operator rides phase like a pilot in light chop. Anticipate, don't chase. Trim, don't tug. The goal is coherence, not speed. 2 hours. Numbers hold, but a faint tremor appears on a zoomed view. Micro-oscillations barely riding the main load. Someone circles the trace and writes, watch. Rate trims down a hair. Compensator phase shifts forward a beat. The wobble shrinks but refuses to vanish. That's not panic. That's respect for a miles-long spring that remembers everything you do to it and sings it back later if you're sloppy. 3 hours. A thermocline brushes the string. Drag thickens. Vertical load ticks up 1%. The envelope swallows the step. Thrusters nudge to kill a lazy yaw the current wants to feed. Acoustic beacons keep talking. The geometry tightens. Lateral 0.3 left, yaw 0.2 right. Feet down they become inches. The room breathes in sync with the graph. 4 hours. A veteran taps the glass over a torsion gauge and says, if that drifts a hair more, we're chasing it. He's not dramatic. He's accurate. Procedure answers. Slower cadence, wider eyes on phase. Above, the cover team stages a maintenance pause that looks messy and reads normal. The trawler at the edge of sight logs it and slides along. 5 hours. The oscillations return, a shade larger and a touch slower. Accumulators swing deeper, the sawtooth you never want to see hints at a mode waking up. They run a planned micro-lower, mere inches to bleed energy. Hold, watch the loop flatten. Resume. It works mostly. Good enough to climb. Nothing at sea is perfect. The ocean punishes people who wait for perfect. 6 hours, halfway. The phrase no one says fits behind teeth. If it were going to tear, it might have torn by now. That's a lie professionals don't indulge. Oscillation energy doesn't care about clocks. It cares about phase. The operator trims rate again, shifts phase again, and the room returns to quiet math. The compensator keeps its promise, vertical load steady as a metronome. Lateral stays quiet enough to ignore, for now. 7 hours. A faint lateral whisper shows on a sensor near the frame. Wrong note, small amplitude. Thrusters change posture, tilting the string a degree to steal the ocean's rhythm. Whisper fades. A smile tries to show and gets flattened by habit. Numbers first, pride later. 8 hours. The system remembers a note you hoped it forgot. The wobble comes back with a longer period, like a loose hinge starting to talk. Finger loads remain even. Engagement still looks broad. The team runs another micro-lower, bleeds and reseats. The graph smooths. Everyone buys more minutes the old-fashioned way, by refusing drama and repeating discipline. 9 hours. The sawtooth deepens. The main load dips a fraction, spikes a hair, settles just under baseline. Mines do the same silent math, a redistribution down there. A finger lost a bite and a neighbor took it. No thresholds trip. No alarms scream. They slow the rate and tighten watch windows. The ascent becomes a negotiation with time, not height. Now, this is important because stillness isn't safety. Stopping can feed resonance as easily as moving, and dead time invites currents to shift, temperatures to creep, and fatigue to grow in silence. The safest speed is the one that keeps the system coherent without giving the ocean a clean note to sing. That's why the cadence stays, restrained, stubborn, alive. 10 hours. A groan threads through the derrick, more posture than sound. The main load drops 2% in a blink, spikes 3, then settles 1 below where it lived. Voices stay level, check finger loads, confirm geometry, verify phase. One finger gauge flutters, recovers, flutters again. Someone says, possible partial slippage. The supervisor answers, no shocks, prepare reseat. They nudge a tiny downward motion, measured inches to let shoes find bone again. The trace smooths. The room exhales through noses, not mouths. 11 hours, 20 minutes. The oscillation sneaks back stronger, as if the sea took offense. The compensator works near the edge of its band, but within it. A low vibration walks up handrails, telling veterans what the gauges will say next. And then failure arrives the way real failures do, without music. The main load goes light in a heartbeat. Needles swing. Pens race. The ship shudders, suddenly relieved of a fight it's been politely losing. A heartbeat later, the riser delivers a delayed thud, mass striking water far below. The new steady state settles lighter. Calls stay clinical, lock compensation, freeze rate, verify clamp status, confirm alignment. The operator says, remaining load stable. Everyone hears the unsaid words. A section fell. Aftermath is still mission. You lift what you still own. The cover team above keeps the boring show at full volume because the worst time to look interesting is now. Below, thresholds narrow. Every variance earns a pause. The ascent becomes a crawl where small rescues stitch into momentum. Patience is the only currency left. 11 hours, 50 minutes. The graph behaves like it learned a lesson instead of passing an exam. Finger loads stay even within tighter bands. Torsion hints but doesn't build. The system climbs because procedure is stubborn and the ocean hasn't found a new song it likes better. 12 hours. The first joints break air, spray hisses off steel. The moon pool doors wait like a throat ready to swallow truth. Numbers say enough survive to matter. Faces say they know what the deep kept. And the lesson rides up with the wreck. You don't beat the sea. You buy minutes, bleed energy, and refuse to lie to yourself about price. Then you close the doors and count what the abyss allowed you to hold. Inside, the steel tomb. They ease what's left into the moon pool like a wounded animal. Doors slide shut. The Pacific vanishes. Inside, the air turns cold and metallic. heavy with oil and salt, and the kind of quiet that means something just changed. The section settles onto timber-lined cradles, shorter than anyone hoped, heavier than anyone wants. No cheers, no speeches, just eyes tracking fractures and bent frames, hunting for what the snap took and what it spared. Now this is important because the clock flips the second steel meets air. Radiation protocols stand up fast. Techs in soft suits move with muscle memory, meters chirping, swabs across seams, wipes into bags, into boxes, into logs. Readings tick high enough to demand respect, low enough to work. 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes sit where you don't want them, scored, silt-streaked, intact. The rule is simple: measure first, touch last. You never assume the deep left you a safe gift, especially after a mid-ascent fracture that already proved how quickly control becomes memory. What's on the cradles is modest and huge at the same time. A forward-leaning midships fragment, torn frames like ribs, buckled plating, a crushed compartment that once held men and manuals. The Dream Vault, intact nav racks, full crypto missile guidance brains, fell with the mass that slipped. But yield isn't zero. Mechanical assemblies live here. Sonar baffles, valve clusters, fasteners, bearings, cable looms. To a good analyst, a bolt is a biography. Alloy choice, heat treatment, quality control, corrosion doctrine. A gasket tells you how they expect systems to fail and how often they expect to touch them. Forensics starts with cameras and never apologizes. Every angle, every scar, scale bars taped in. Raked light to force shadows that reveal crack direction. Corrosion patterns sketch current flow like a map. Feathered tiers argue tension, not explosive. Bowed bulkheads whisper about implosion waves moving first, then seabed impact finishing the work. You build a timeline from damage, violence at depth, the long fall, the seabed's final punctuation, then 6 years of chemical patience. Theories get invited in, then shown out when the details don't sit with the metal. Now you might be thinking, did they get codes? Paper hates oceans. Ink walks, bindings rot. Anything buoyant finds exits you can't police. What survives looks like ghosts, partial pages, impressions on backing boards, fused lumps that give up letters under forensic light. Useful, yes. Transformative, no. The headline turns out to be construction truth, weld rhythm, steel pedigree, sealing bias, interface choices. How they build tells you how they maintain, how they fight, and how they fail. Then the room goes quiet for a different reason. They find remains. Human, unmistakable, everything stops. Protocols take the lead and everyone follows. Identification isn't truly possible. Respect is. A chaplain's voice fills the bay in 2 languages. A flag covers a metal casket because measurements say cloth and wood aren't right today. 6 sailors leave under honors. Cameras roll, not as leverage, but as proof of intent. That reel will travel years later to a room in Moscow to puncture a narrative that could poison everything else. Everything changes when the tools come back out. The steel isn't just a prize now, it's a tomb and a teacher. Samples get cut cold to protect microstructure. Chips drop into labeled envelopes for hardness tests, composition checks, grain reads. Welds become sentences, pass counts, rod types, heat-affected zones. You can see when a yard hurried and where a supervisor insisted. You can see doctrine in a bead's breath. Valve gear gives a different chapter. Seal materials, clearance philosophies, galling defenses. You turn each into a sentence about maintenance cycles and supply chains. Sonar faceplates, surrender mounting geometry and damping tricks. Cable ends tell you connector families and pinouts that match procurement rumors. Quiet knowledge stacks up in boring labels that move real needles years later. Counter-design tweaks, new tolerances, smarter estimates in rooms with no windows. Now this is important because the machine that grabbed it gets graded too. Did Clementine crush? Finger shoes show broad, even witness marks within spec. Good. Did nodes crack? Dye penetrant reveals hairlines exactly where models worried. Proof the math was honest. Heave comp profiles match what the room remembers. The failure signature leans toward what physics predicted. Brittle, pre-stressed steel, coaxed by a torsional mode that woke during the ascent. Sabotage gets its hour and sits down. Alignment error gets its whisper and no more. Microstory that tells you how secrets live. A young engineer palms an unreadable aluminium tag from a cable bundle, small, shiny, tempting. then turns, exhales, and drops it in the evidence bag. No souvenirs. That's how programs survive, by 100 small, correct choices when no one's watching. Sanitization wraps everything before the doors open. Torpedoes become hazardous research articles with quiet escorts. Components become industrial samples. Cover logs speak mining throughput. Cleared logs speak code words and chain of custody. If a question gets too sharp, the response is muscle memory. We can neither confirm nor deny. Bureaucratic on purpose. Dullness as shield. When the weather doors finally part and daylight hammers back in, the world outside hasn't changed. Inside, everyone has. The intelligence yield is real in the margins that steer wars, the kind you feel in procurement specs and tactics briefs, not parades. The human cost is real in a way you can't spreadsheet. The broken claw stops being a headline and becomes a set of stress risers, abort thresholds, and rituals you will never skip again. Now you might be thinking, who gets to know? Fences close tight. A handful of briefers carry phrases like construction insights and material characterizations into sealed rooms. Most of what mattered will travel as decisions. A slightly different alloy here, a revised lift procedure there, a new sensor that pays for itself in one avoided resonance. The sea gave up part of its secret and kept the rest. And everyone who touched this learns the same lesson people at depth always learn. The ocean keeps the final edit, and if you're smart, you read the footnotes it lets you bring home. The cover story goes to war. Outside the moon pool, the lie tightens like a tourniquet. The line you've heard, we can neither confirm nor deny, hardens from careful phrasing into muscle memory. Reporters start sniffing. A rumor walks from a long beach bar to a Washington desk. The answer isn't a denial. Denials can be disproved. It isn't a confirmation. That's a subpoena magnet. It's refusal as policy. Neither confirm nor deny. Full stop. Now, this is important because the wall isn't just legal. It's operational. Soviet trawlers aren't dumb. They've been shadowing since mid-1974. They can count pipe trips and station-keeping cycles and see a derrick that never quite looks like exploration. Suspicion rises, but proof stays caged behind steel doors and a story that reads boring in all the right places. Proof needs eyes inside the box. The box never opens. The press storm builds in layers. Trade mags gush about manganese nodules. A regional paper marvels at Hughes's ocean gold rush. Then a national outlet hints at something stranger, citing sources with direct knowledge. Phones heat up inside Langley. Outside, message discipline stiffens. No color, no adjectives. If a journalist hits a true detail by luck, you leave it lonely until it looks like a mistake. Don't give facts companions. Then a gift nobody ordered. Hughes drama. Corporate tangles, erratic behavior, boardroom reshuffles, loud and unrelated to Azorian. The cover rides that turbulence. Headlines about Hughes crowd out whispers about Glomar. Accidental shielding is still shielding. You don't plan it, you use it. But here's where it gets interesting. The Soviets probe softly. A trawler drifts closer than etiquette. A loud hailer asks for safety coordination. The bridge replies in the language of industry. Hazardous operations, maintain clearance. No flags raised. No tempers. Maritime boredom layered over espionage urgency. Privately, there's a clipboard no one wants to touch. If boarding is attempted, initiate emergency destruction and flood the well. That sentence tastes like metal. Doctrine of denial gets a field test when a major paper calls for comment. Lawyers, operators, and a few exhausted engineers meet in a room that smells like coffee and worry. The agreed response is the one you already know. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of records responsive to your request. It reads bureaucratic by design. Bureaucratic sounds dull. Dull is armor. The story prints anyway. The agency holds the line. Years later, courts will give that line a name, Glomar. For now, it's just the quiet answer that keeps a door closed without showing you the hinges. Inside Congress, another weather system forms. Staffers want briefings. Oversight clears its throat. The price tag is huge, the risk vicious, the payoff partially classified. Need-to-know fences go up. A few members hear the full truth. Most get the mining tour, seabed resources, American innovation, offshore leadership. Oxygen burns fast. Sunk cost psychology pulls up a chair. Now you might be thinking, if the cover holds, why worry? Because cameras multiply. A satellite catch shows a shadow mid-move over the moon pool. It proves nothing, but suggestive shapes breed confident captions. A magazine commission draws the ship too close to real. Managers spend a week sanding detail off anything that leaves a desk. Sanitization becomes craft. Every diagram loses a joint. Every paragraph loses a verb. Soviet suspicion hardens into doctrine. Watch that ship. When Glomar returns to port, antennas tilt. When she sails, merchant traffic hums with interest. The cover graduates from story to habit. Crews rehearse blandness. Logs read like paint drying. The less interesting each entry, the more durable the fiction. Expect drama, get routine, look away. Leaks don't stop. They never do. A contractor brags about depths no one's touched. A tech hints at a capture device. Each pinprick meets the same membrane. No confirmation, no denial, no oxygen. Time scabs it over. The tale refuses to cohere because the architects won't provide the joints it needs to stand. That's not paranoia. That's design. Everything changes when talk of a second try lands on a quiet agenda. Could they go back for what fell at 16,500 feet? The Soviets are more alert. The press is hungrier. The cover is battle-tested and frayed. Risk curves turn red. Technically, fixes exist. Stiffer frame nodes, tuned compensation, sharper modal monitoring. Operationally, concealment gets worse with repetition. Ambition meets prudence, and prudence wins more votes than before. In Moscow, fallout moves inward. Boards write in sober ink about procedure and material. Counterintelligence writes in pencil about American reach. They can't prove a lift, but probability shapes doctrine. Patrol routes shift. Recovery protocols classify deeper. Curiosity becomes expensive. Back home, that line migrates from decks to courtrooms. Neither confirm nor deny becomes template. The ship's cover turns into policy architecture. When the story cracks in 1975, the phrase takes the punch and stays standing. That's the victory. Controversy turned into paperwork, then into precedent. There's a micro-story from a foyer shop years later. A junior drafts a helpful partial denial. A supervisor crosses out 3 sentences and writes 1 line, neither confirm nor deny. The junior looks disappointed. The supervisor says, "Context is the leak." Clean edges where curiosity cuts itself. So the cover goes to war and comes back as law. The mining fiction shields an operation at sea, then trains a generation how to say less so secrets live longer. And here's the tension you can't unhear. The bigger the truth you hide, the quieter the sentence that keeps it hidden. The aftermath in Moscow and Langley. In Moscow, the ocean silence echoes through grey offices. Officially, K-129 was lost with all hands in March 1968. Unofficially, the questions multiply. Boards convene to separate material failure from human error. Torpedo safety earns harsher checklists. Missile compartment protocols, fuel handling, and emergency blow procedures get rewritten first in pencil, then in ink. The tone is sober. Procedural lapses, material fatigue, training gaps. Inspections bite deeper. Timelines stretch. The submarine force learns to live with oversight that feels like penance. Now this is important because the story doesn't stop at safety. Counterintelligence lights up. If the Americans found the wreck, what else did they touch? Cryptographic material, photographs, anything lifted at all. Proof is absent, probability is. That's enough to harden doctrine. Communications discipline tightens. Crypto changeouts accelerate. Need to know narrows. You treat uncertainty like a leak until it isn't, because the cost of being wrong is measured in compromised signals, not headlines. Everything changes when reports of an American mining ship filter into cleared offices. Trawler logs note a towering derrick, meticulous station keeping, too much riser handling for geology. Analysts split. Some call it capitalist theater. Others call it theft in slow motion. The argument doesn't resolve, so guidance turns blunt. Assume compromise, mitigate everywhere. Patrol routes lose rhythm. Picking predictable boxes invites ambush. Recovery procedures for future accidents get classified inside classification. Curiosity becomes expensive. A micro-story from a design bureau catches the mood. A metallurgist slams a weld-quality report on an older class. The boss nods and says quietly, "Fix the metal, but don't write the anger." Paper moves clean. Anger stays unfiled. Cultural doctrine shifts. Tighten standards, bury embarrassment, speak less. Quiet directives ripple outward. Track Western deep-sea platforms with more precision. Expand antenna farms to hoover up innocuous maritime chatter. Lean on allied ports when suspicious. Research vessels request services. There's early talk of domestic deep ocean reach. Rescue, salvage, cable work, quiet manipulation at depth. If the Americans can tap the abyss, you meet them there or accept blindness. Meanwhile in Langley, celebration doesn't show. The partial lift lands like a paradox, an engineering miracle with an intelligence hangover. Interagency meetings split instantly. CIA points to yield, 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes secured, construction forensics, materials insight, quiet confirmation of long-held estimates. Navy hammers the risks. Resonance, fatigue, ascent profiles that walked a razor. Budget officers hang a number in the air and ask whether a second attempt turns good money into bad headlines. Legal holds a folder labeled exposure and taps it like a metronome. Now you might be thinking, surely a second mission sells itself. It doesn't. The world knows more today than yesterday. The Soviets are alert, the press is circling, and the nodule cover wears scorch marks from 1975 leaks. Technically, fixes exist. Stiffer frame nodes, tuned compensation, real-time modal monitoring at the frame, fairings to blunt vortex-induced vibration, refined lift profiles with scheduled microlowers. Operationally, concealment worsens with repetition. Strategically, one more broken claw could break more than metal. The room starts trusting prudence over appetite. Arguments sharpen. Pro-return voices say uniqueness trumps fear. No other vault will ever lie open at 16,500 feet again. Anti-return voices say uniqueness cuts both ways. Nothing else is this hard to hide, and this easy to scandalize. A compromise camp proposes a servially return. Tag, map, image, don't lift. The all-or-nothing crowd starts losing the room to people who have to brief cameras as well as committees. Postmortems harden into lessons you can't publish. Vortex-induced vibration isn't a footnote, it's a repeat offender. Heave compensation isn't magic, it's a time-buying negotiation with waves. Capture frames need soft fail load paths and telltale sensors on hinge pins to catch clearance growth early. Control rooms require phase drift displays you can't ignore. Lift profiles add energy bleed steps by design, not as rescue moves. The lab improves models. The sea shrugs. Smart teams stay humble. Micro-story from a design review. A chief scrawls, "No heroes," across a whiteboard. Translation, don't rely on skill to rescue thin margins. Automated aborts get written where human optimism used to live. That cultural shift is quiet and permanent, the kind that saves you twice and never gets credit. Inside Congress, oversight breathes heavier. A few members get full briefings and grim nods. Most get the mining lecture, seabed resources, American innovation, offshore capability. Budgets are ecosystems. To keep this program warm, other lines go lean. The sunk cost gravity well tugs at votes. Nobody can say why on the record, but everyone knows which line kept its heat. Publicly, the agency presents nothing. Privately, it closes loops that matter. The burial footage, a solemn ceremony in English and Russian for 6 sailors, crosses a divide in 1992. Gesture isn't strategy, but it blunts the sharpest accusation, grave robbing with a flag. You can be ruthless and still choose where not to be cruel. Soviet planners internalize a different balance. Safety regimes tighten. Counterintelligence assumes reach. Fleet doctrine subtracts predictability. The absence of a boarding incident becomes its own quiet success, a crisis that never happened because several professionals on both sides understood the price of improvisation. By year's end, the second lift idea sits on a shelf with a respectful label. The Hughes Glomar Explorer finds other lives. The doctrine you met earlier, neither confirm nor deny, walks off the pier and into FOIA case law. Inside Langley, the file gets thicker, not louder. Inside Moscow, procedures get stricter, not kinder. Two capitals change without admitting it. The abyss keeps what it kept. And everyone who touched this learns the same thing. When you gamble with the deep sets the odds, and the smartest victories are the crises you never trigger. Declassification, denials, and the Glomar legacy. Decades later, the file creaks open in slivers. FOIA requests hit that same wall we can neither confirm nor deny, and bounce. It reads like a shrug. It's actually architecture. Lawyers polish it. Agencies adopt it. Courts bless it with caveats most people will never read. The sentence stops being about a ship and turns into a policy spine other secrets hang on. Now, this is important because what does come out isn't a story. It's a constellation. A memo here, a redacted paragraph there, a meeting title with no minutes. The CIA's internal history trickles with black bars where numbers should be. Dates survive. Some names thin. The impression is carefully incomplete. Praise the engineering, blur the yield, sand off the arguments. You learn as much from what's missing as from what's on the page. Everything changes when one reel appears. The burial footage, short, sanitized. A chaplain, a flag, 6 sailors carried with honor. No clamps, no load graphs, no moment the ocean took its cut. It's honest on narrow terms, respect for the dead, restraint with the living, and it redirects the fight. Critics stop yelling grave robbery and start debating method. How, not whether. Cameras don't always reveal, sometimes they anesthetize. Researchers stitch the gaps with open sources. Naval historians, journalists, a few former hands compare notes. Some say it was a failure dressed as a miracle. Others argue the miracle stands even if the prize was smaller. The agency doesn't referee. It lets the arguments age. When a claim wanders too close, the Glomar Response steps in, absorbs pressure, and refuses to illuminate the silhouette behind it. That's the alchemy. Turn controversy into process. The legal legacy grows far beyond the moon pool. Glomarizing, record spreads across intelligence, defense, even law enforcement. Courts, wary of forcing disclosures that identify classified programs by their shadows, permit the formula when acknowledging the existence of records would itself reveal a protected fact. The rule is elegant and infuriating. Deny the premise of the question. Neither confirm nor deny. Full stop. There's a micro-story from a FOIA office that nails the culture. A junior drafts a helpful partial denial with context. A supervisor crosses out 3 sentences and leaves 1 line, neither confirm nor deny. The junior looks disappointed. The supervisor says, context is the leak. That lesson outlives both of them. Now you might be thinking, doesn't time fix this? Sometimes. More often, it rearranges the furniture. New releases corroborate mechanics, depth, acoustic arrays, heave comp math, while keeping intentions softly lit. Budgets show up as ranges. Contractor lists arrive with gaps. A map annotation survives while its scale vanishes. The edges sharpen, the center stays fog. If that frustrates you, it's working as intended. Culturally, Azorian becomes a touchstone for clandestine engineering and the narration of secrecy. Documentaries lean human, skim the math that's still pinned under classification. Pop histories canonize Howard Hughes as the perfect deacon, turning a cover into folklore. The Manganese nodule fiction, so persuasive in the early 197s, keeps seeding real debates about deep-sea mining every time the story resurfaces. A lie birthed curiosity. Curiosity built an industry. Inside agencies, a quieter lesson spreads. Front-load deniability. Bake cover into contracts, language, and hardware, so you never need crisis improvisation. You see it in dual-use platforms. Survey hulls with crane capacity that just happens to match heavier tasks. Test beds sized for classified payloads. Satellites filed as weather while they watch something else. The Glomar Response moves from sentence to mindset. If acknowledging existence exposes method, refuse the premise on day one. The memo trail reveals another bureaucratic truth. Secrecy needs budgets, and budgets need stories. When you can't say what you got, you say what you learned. Station-keeping algorithms, deep lift control, pressure-balanced systems. Real advances become headline value that justifies future money without exposing method. The pitch shifts from "we recovered X" to "we can now reach Y." Capability sells when content can't. Everything changes when the public starts using Glomar as a verb. Journalists write, "They glomied us." Activists probe the doctrine's edges. Litigators hunt seams where an agency confirmed elsewhere and can't plausibly deny here. Small wins nibble the perimeter. The core survives. The refusal remains the most revealing answer you can't quote. There's a final twist most people miss. Partial declassification created paradoxical credibility. Admit just enough, dates, ship, a limited outcome, and the larger unspoken parts become believable without being said. Institutions claim transparency while practicing measured opacity. Each Azorian anniversary reminds you, the best cover stories don't lie, they underexplain. Micro-story from a courthouse hall. A reporter asks a government lawyer, "So does it exist?" The lawyer smiles professionally. "I can neither confirm nor deny." Eye roll, shrug. Conversation over. That's the doctrine doing its job, ending the scene before the second question can corner the truth. So the legacy isn't just a ship, a claw, or coordinates etched in classified charts. It's a reflex. Instrument everything, speak carefully, let documents say less than they know. And it's why, to this day, when you ask the right question about the abyss, the loudest answer might be silence shaped into a sentence. The real stakes: accident, escalation, or message. Here's the uncomfortable question. What were they really gambling with, metal, headlines, or war? Engineers can price a riser, model heave, and bracket failure probabilities. But a Soviet captain doesn't see phase drift. He sees an American miner parked over a lost ballistic missile boat. Intent is invisible at sea. Interpretation is. Now, this is important because escalation rarely begins with orders. It starts with framing. A trawler edges close and calls for safety coordination. Glomar replies in commercial speak. Hazardous operations, maintain clearance. A swell slides hulls, a fender kisses paint, radios spike, and suddenly you're rehearsing a scene nobody wrote. In international waters, a boarding request is law-dressed as risk. Decline and you look guilty. Accept and you expose secrets you can't reseal. Stall and you tempt the boldest sailor to improvise. Everything changes if a Soviet ship crowds station keeping. Thrusters work harder, fuel burns faster, and position error creeps. Lose a meter, pick up torque. Torque isn't weight, it's twist. Twist travels down miles of pipe and wakes the bad notes you spent months detuning. That's how physics becomes politics. If the snap happens then, whose cable tells the story first? We witnessed hazardous mining versus they interfered with safe operations. Each sentence writes a different tomorrow. Micro-story from contingency drills. The notional hail comes. We intend to inspect for safety. Paper offers tea, the wrong deck, a lab with bins and charts, and a closed door before the moon pool. One page deeper lives the plan nobody wants to touch. If boots cross the line, flood the well, wipe the logs, make the secret into seawater. You don't bet courage beats urgency. You bet muscle memory outruns panic. Now you might be thinking, why risk any of this for scraps of steel? Because blindness is expensive later. If you never touch adversary metallurgy, sealing, wiring standards, or weapon interfaces, you guess when it counts. Guessing is blood. Intelligence is insurance. You spend ugly now to pay less in error bars later. That's the policy answer. The human answer is quieter. People wanted to know if the abyss was reachable and whether reach could be disguised. Accident chains love complacency. Most people imagine one big failure. Real ones stack small truths. A barely nicked thread becomes a stress riser. A forgotten damper lets a whisper fatten into a sawtooth. A thermocline thickens drag and nudges heave compensation phase just off. A trawler's wake brushes the bow and adds a beat your model didn't budget. None of those kills you alone. Together they do. In peacetime, that's an engineering tragedy. In the Cold War, it's a diplomatic fuse. So was the partial lifter message. Some rooms wanted it to be. Raising anything says, we can touch what you think the abyss owns. That's deterrence by capability, spoken without a podium. If Moscow believes you can work at 16,500 feet and hide it in plain sight, patrol routes change, recovery urgency spikes, and cable security stops being theoretical. You don't need to wave a flag if you can plant a fact. But here's where it gets interesting. Messages only work if the other side hears them without being forced to answer. Officially, both capitals pretended nothing happened. Unofficially, behavior shifted. Soviet watchers tightened patterns around Western deep-sea platforms. US planners wrote new guardrails into every heavy-lift profile. Communication happened through procedure, not press. Professionals on both sides let instincts outrun politics, and that restraint is why nobody cut a line across a boarding ladder. Strategically, the operation held three truths at once. 1. It was an engineering moonshot that proved access to a hostile regime of pressure and dark. 2. It was an accident factory where small errors multiplied faster than radios could de-escalate. 3. It was a story weapon. Leaked wrong, it painted grave robbing. Leaked right, it painted nerve and reach. Managers had to keep Glomar inside the tiny overlap where ambition didn't become provocation. The human truth threads under it. Engineers want margins. Operators want clean scripts. Case officers want deniability. Politicians want outcomes they can neither confirm nor deny later. Those wants collide. The ocean doesn't care. So you compromise. Slower lifts than schedules prefer. Fewer eyes than historians want. More legalese than audiences like. Everyone gambles and tells themselves their chip is the small one. Micro story from a planning whiteboard. 3 overlapping circles. Accident, escalation, message, shaded where they meet. Someone wrote, live here. Not fatalism, discipline. Every call, rate, phase, thruster posture, media posture got weighed against those rings. The success you never celebrate is the radio call that didn't happen, the boarding that never started, the collision averted by a meter and a minute. Now this is important because worth it depends on your ruler. If you tally metal, the answer leans no. If you score reach, proving you can do precise, heavy work at 16,500 feet and disguise it, the answer leans yes. If you value doctrine, the refusal line that became law, the template for running a city block ship in sightlines, the answer becomes a long game. Capability plus cover is power, even when the prize shrinks on the way up. Everything changes when you accept that the closest brush with disaster wasn't the snap. It was the possibility of a demand to board met by a refusal on a windy deck. That chain was coiled from day one. It never sprang, less because luck showed up than because professionals on both sides understood that curiosity at sea can turn into incident faster than headquarters can fax wisdom. So what were the real stakes? All of them. Accident was always waiting, escalation was always possible, and message, intended or not, traveled to anyone counting pipe and watching patterns. The abyss took its tax. The surface kept its peace. And the lasting lesson writes itself into every later playbook. Operate in grey, instrument your grey, plan for phase, not just force, and never lie to yourself about how quickly physics becomes politics. The broken claw theory, what actually failed. Okay, so here's the thing. Metal at sea almost never fails for one reason. It's a stack of small truths that line up, then pick a minute you can't spare. Start with what Clementine had to grip. K-129's mid-body wasn't steel anymore. It was a memory. Years at 16,500 feet cold-soaked welds shifted toughness toward brittleness and left micro-cracks at heat-affected zones you couldn't see. Add pre-stress from the 1968 implosion and the seabed impact, and you're hugging a skeleton that wants to splinter if you breathe wrong. Now, this is important because Clementine's fingers weren't claws. They were tapered box beam levers with elastomer shoes and all-pinned hinges designed to hunt bone. Internal frames and ring stiffeners, by feel, not by sight. Witness marks later showed broad contact where it mattered, which says the grip was real. So if your shoes sat right, what let go? Look at the structure behind the grip. The inner finger yoke weldments and hinge knuckles. Nodes where vertical load, lateral drift, and torsion shake hands. Models flagged those nodes as hot spots. Post-lift dye-penetrant found hairlines exactly there. The math was honest. The ocean just made the margins thinner. Everything changes when you add the riser's song. Miles of pipe are a musical instrument the sea loves to play. You detune vortex-induced vibration with fairings, mass collars, and diameter steps, but currents shift and thermoclines thicken drag. The Strauhel rhythm can still lock a weak band. Vertical heave looked tamed topside, compensation keeping load inside its band, but perfect vertical corrections can feed lateral and torsional energy at depth if phase drifts. Delay is the villain. The surface applies a fix, the bottom feels a moment late. That lag is where small oscillations fatten into sortie. So what likely failed? Stack the clues. The Ascent logs caught a long period wobble that recurred, flattened with microlowers, then returned fatter. Finger gauges stayed mostly even until one fluttered. The main load dipped a hair, spiked higher, then found a new, slightly lower baseline before the snap. That sounds like a partial load path migration, clearance growing in a hinge or microcrack advancement in a yoke, shifting work to neighbors. Clearance is a liar. A hinge pin fretting inside an all-filled pocket can open microns, change friction, and hand torsion to a weld that was never meant to carry it alone. Once the weld's K-factor crosses threshold, Paris law takes over. Crack growth accelerates. Failure announces itself as lightness on a gauge, not drama in the air. Now you might be thinking, couldn't the algorithm save it? To a point. The team did the right things. Trim rate, shift control phase, microlower to bleed energy, tilt thrusters to change string angle and move the mode. Those worked until they didn't. Real-time control can't cancel physics you're exciting by accident with delay. The spring stores your best intentions and returns them as twist a beat later. Alternative theories got their hour. Sabotage. No chain of custody anomalies, no signatures of tampering, and the failure pattern fit mechanics, not malice. Gross misalignment. Unlikely. Early microlifts held shape like bone, not paint. Catastrophic internal hull disintegration unrelated to the frame. Possible, but timing points to coupled failure. Brittle, pre-stressed steel plus a torsional note the system accidentally fed over hours. Not either or, both and. Metallurgy closes a loop most people skip. Comparable Soviet steels from the 196s show low temperature embrittlement sensitivity, especially at weld toes. If the inner fingers truly sat on a frame seeded with microcracks in 1968, then an alternating torsion, small, persistent, slightly off phase, can grow those cracks fast. The room felt it as a softening load. The riser translated it as that delayed thud. The ocean kept most of the forensic proof. Now this is important because the fix wasn't build it bigger. Bigger shifts failure, it doesn't erase it. The redesign mantra became, assume your inputs lie. Stiffen the hot nodes, sure, but also shove natural frequencies away from the riser's favorite songs with mass and geometry. Put telltales in the hinges, clearance sensors, pin strain, torsion meters, so onset is visible, not guessed. Tune elastomer shoes to spread pressure without creep. Add sacrificial links that fail soft and loud to protect the main frame. And move modal monitoring from a backroom plot to a wall you can't ignore. Procedures shifted too. Microlowers stopped being rescues and became scheduled bleeds. Phase drift thresholds got automated so optimism couldn't vote. Thruster posture changes, tilt the string a degree to steal the C's rhythm, moved into the script. No heroes, turn from a whiteboard scrawl into a lockout on rate increases when certain bands light up. Acceptance tests added forced oscillation trials in the nasty zones no one enjoys. There's a micro story that says it clean. In a redesign review, an engineer boxed the CAD around the yoke, wrote, "Design for wrong," and underlined it twice. Not sexy, not cinematic, just the kind of humility the deep respects. So what failed? A well-designed system met a brittle, pre-stressed wreck, while a miles-long spring hummed a note time-delayed control kept nudging. Metallurgy, vibration, and delay aligned for minutes that mattered. The lesson is don't reach. It's instrument the lies your system will tell you, bleed energy before it grows teeth, and build exits you'll actually take. That's how you go back to 16,500 feet and come home with more than a story. How Azorian rewired deep ocean power. Okay, so here's the thing. When you push the edge this hard, the edge moves. Azorian didn't just lift steel. It rewired how nations think about the abyss. The first shift was control. Heave compensation went from a one-off monster to a playbook. Predict phase, cap force, keep the bottom blind to the surface's worst moods. Offshore rigs, heavy lift ships, even research fleets copied the logic and hid it in software. Vertical stability stopped being art and started being a spec. Now this is important because Clementine taught operators a brutal truth. Sight fails at 16,500 feet, but touch scales. That idea sprinted. ROVs matured with pressure-balanced housings, manipulators with force feedback, and control laws that assume delay lies to you. Fiber tethers carried more truth, less noise. Pilots learned to fly graphs, not cameras. Blind precision became normal. If you can sense load, you can do surgery in black water. Everything changes when cover stops being a wrapper and becomes design. Azorian baked deniability into hull forms, logs, and language. Afterward, programs front-loaded that mindset. Contracts split functions, so no vendor held the full picture. Hulls wore dual-use silhouettes, survey vessels with crane capacity that just happened to match heavier tasks. Test beds sized for payloads no brochure mentions. Paperwork learned to under-explain. Hardware learned to pass as boring. Adversaries kept pace. In the late 197s and into the 198s, Soviet and later Russian, deep-sea reach sharpened. Rescue subs gained legs and hands. Quiet motherships carried vehicles to cable country and loitered where latency maps power. The seabed turned from void to corridor. Tap a trunk, map a sensor line, read a repeater's sign. That's leverage measured in milliseconds. Western navies noticed and started shadowing. Research. Silhouettes with winches too big for science fairs. Micro-story from a later operation. A cable team sees phase drift tick yellow and aborts automatically. Old culture would have flown it by feel. New culture pauses, bleeds energy, retunes and resumes. No drama, no dented pride. That reflex didn't fall from the sky. It walked off Glomar's deck and moved into doctrine. No heroes, no myths, just thresholds the sea respects. Tech followed the caution. Lift frames added redundant load paths that fail soft and loud. Hinge pins sat in all pockets with monitored headspace so friction stays predictable and leaks announce themselves. Riser strings wore fairings and diameter steps to scramble vortex shedding. Controllers predicted phase from sea state instead of reacting to spikes. Connectors got smarter, wet mateable, keyed, corrosion resilient, so hands in gloves can't make silent errors. If failure modes hide at edges, you move the edges. Now you might be thinking, does this militarize the deep? In practice, it securitizes it. Undersea cables, pipelines, sensor arrays, the soft guts of modern life became strategic terrain. You don't need to cut a cable to control it. You need to know where it lies, how it breathes, where it's blind, and how fast you can touch it without being seen. Azorian reframed the seabed as infrastructure with permissions. Survey turned into a family of verbs. Map, measure, monitor, manipulate. Policy migrated with the tools. Neither confirm nor deny walked off the pier and into foyer, press lines, and courtroom scripts. Agencies standardized the reflex. If acknowledging existence paints a silhouette, refuse the premise. Budgets adapted the same way. When you can't say what you got, you say what you can now reach. Station-keeping math, deep lift control, pressure balancing tricks. Capability replaced content as the headline that keeps money moving without exposing method. Universities and yards followed the breadcrumbs. The Nodule fictions seeded real research. Grants funded polymetallic studies. Contractors pitched moon pool miracles and delivered enough to stay believed. Irony held. A cover story midwifed a frontier that now argues about ecology, economics, and law. The original lie retired. The hardware it justified stayed employed. Adversary response didn't just mirror, it innovated. Compact platforms with modest silhouettes started hosting vehicles that could sit near trunks and listen. Western patrol cycles shifted to shadow them. Notices to mariners about charting multiplied into wallpaper. Dull language did what it always does, cover interesting work with a yawn. Inside ops rooms, assurance moved from binders to dashboards. Real-time modal monitoring, big font phase drift, energy bleed timers, non-negotiable. Acceptance tests added forced oscillation drills in the ugly bands no one loves. Lift profiles wrote microlowers into the schedule, not as rescues. The cultural math flipped. Aborts proved discipline, not fear. That's Azorian's ghost. Assume inputs lie, trust instruments first, and design exits you'll actually take. One more shift matters. Running a city block ship in public at scale with a story that holds under a long lens became a policy tool. If you can choreograph steel and silence at once, you don't need to wave flags. You plant facts. That's power in the 197s and now, capability plus cover, calibrated for sightlines. The sea didn't get friendlier. We got better at speaking its language, and better at disguising our accent while we work at 16,500 feet. The cost of a secret. Let's talk price. The public number, about $800 million in the mid-197s, is aircraft carrier money for a single covert bet. In today's terms, you're comfortably into multi-billion territory. And the bill wasn't just steel. You paid for a fake industry, hardened legal doctrine, and silence that could survive curiosity, satellites, and Congress. Budgets are ecosystems. Feeding Azorian meant something else went lean. Naval R&D slipped a cycle. Sensor upgrades waited. A satellite line item fought harder. Behind closed doors, managers traded future capability for a one-time reach to 16,500 feet that might never present again. Now, this is important because secrecy accrues interest. Once you build a lie that big, you have to maintain it. Storage, security, audits, non-disclosures, and quiet pensions for careers with blank years. There's a moral ledger, too. You return 6 sailors with honor and refuse to say how you found them. You brief a handful of lawmakers and ask them to carry skepticism in public and certainty in private. Families on both sides live with partial answers. The price of a secret is often someone else's uncertainty. Strategically, the accounting changes with your ruler. If you count parts, the return looks thin. 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes, construction forensics, materials truth, not intact codebooks and missiles. If you count what changed, the ledger tilts. Heavy lift control, phase-aware procedures, a template for operating at scale inside sightlines, and the doctrine that lets agencies refuse the premise of a question without blinking. Capability sells when content can't. Micro-story from a budget review. A line called Ocean Engineering, commercial demonstration, keeps getting renewed because cancelling it would force a conversation no one can have on the record. That's the subscription fee. The initial bill was vast. The maintenance never ends. Everything changes when you factor opportunity. Azorian normalized doing brutal physics in public while sounding boring. That migrated to cables, pipelines, and seabed sensors. Money followed possibility because a ship proved you can choreograph steel and silence at 16,500 feet. That's not K129 on a spreadsheet. That's we can reach Y, and Y keeps getting funded. So was it worth it? Steel says maybe. Strategy says likely. Ethics says complicated. Democracies have to decide how much truth they can afford to hide while paying for what they can't name. The abyss doesn't issue refunds. It issues lessons. Expensive, humbling, and if you're careful, compounding. The unanswered question and the invitation. Here's the takeaway. One snap didn't just drop steel. It exposed how fast ambition, secrecy, and physics can turn confidence into risk. If you want the modern sequel, watch the next episode where we map the quiet war over undersea cables, surveillance taps, deniable tools, and procedures born on Glomar's deck. Subscribe if this reframed the Cold War for you, and hit the next video to spot the research ships that aren't, before their logs go grey and the answers go silent.